Here is the rise and fall of classic cartoons. From beloved childhood icons to shows people now roast on the internet as, how did we ever watch this? Let's get into it. Most loved, Tom and Jerry. When people talk about all-time classic cartoons, Tom and Jerry almost always shows up. Created by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera in the 1940s, the series became one of MGM's flagship animated properties and is still regularly rerun around the world. The formula is simple but endlessly flexible. A cat, a mouse, and increasingly absurd ways to chase, trick, and flatten each other. Tom and Jerry is loved because it works anywhere with any audience. There's very little dialogue, so all the comedy comes from timing, facial expressions, and music, making it easy to understand across languages and cultures. The early shorts in particular are praised for their smooth animation, expressive character poses, and tight slapstick choreography, which is why they frequently appear near the top of greatest cartoon rankings. Role reversals keep it fresh. Sometimes Jerry wins, sometimes Tom gets a rare victory, and sometimes both are victims of some bigger disaster, which stops the show from feeling predictable. Even when the violence is extreme by today's standards, fans and critics still single it out for its craftsmanship and precise comedic rhythm, rather than shock value. And hey, if you've ever tried to sneak in a snack at night like Jerry dodging household hazards, you basically owe Tom an apology and this channel a subscribe. Balance must be restored. Most loved, Looney Tunes. If Tom and Jerry is a duel, Looney Tunes is an entire comedy universe. Characters like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Sylvester, Tweety, Roadrunner, and Wile E. Coyote formed a rotating cast that carried theatrical shorts, TV blocks, and now endless clips and memes. Many of these shorts still rank among the best animated films ever made in critic polls and fan lists. Each character is a distilled personality type. Bugs is the unflappable trickster, Daffy is chaotic insecurity, Wile E. Coyote is doomed determination, and Elmer Fudd is stubborn incompetence. Writers used these archetypes to build perfect comedic clashes, where just putting two personalities in a situation practically wrote the short. This gave Looney Tunes a level of character-driven humor that feels surprisingly modern. The series also packed in parodies of opera, westerns, classical music, horror, and sci-fi, meaning kids got the slapstick while adults caught the references. Some shorts contain stereotypes that are heavily criticized today, and several have been pulled or context labeled. But the best entries are still studied for their timing, layout, and wit. That's why you still see Bugs' reactions and Daffy meltdowns all over social media decades later. Most loved, Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo, which debuted in 1969, turned one of the simplest formulas in TV history into a multi-generational franchise. Every episode, the gang arrives somewhere spooky. A weird monster appears, clues are found, a trap is built, Shaggy and Scooby panic and snack, and someone gets unmasked with a complaint about meddling kids. That loop proved so strong it survived countless spin-offs, crossovers, and reboots. What makes it loved is the mix of horror vibes and safety. The show uses creepy settings, abandoned theme parks, old mansions, foggy docks, but viewers know it will resolve with a rational explanation and Scooby laughing in the end. It gives kids a way to enjoy tension and mystery without genuine nightmare fuel, teaching that many monsters are just people in masks with bad motives. The Mystery Inc.'s crew are all archetypes that balance each other. Velma the Brains, Fred the Planner, Daphne evolving from danger-prone to capable, and Shaggy and Scooby as scared but ultimately brave goofballs. Their dynamic, plus that instantly recognizable van and theme music, turned Scooby-Doo into a comfort show that still pulls strong nostalgia ratings and constant revivals. Most loved, SpongeBob. SpongeBob. Squarepants might be newer than black and white shorts, but for many millennials and Gen Z, it is the definition of a classic cartoon. Premiering in 1999, it quickly became one of Nickelodeon's biggest hits and remains one of the most watched and merchandised cartoons ever. Early seasons, especially, are singled out on Best Kids Shows of All Time list for their surreal comedy and quotable moments. The appeal comes from its cast and world. SpongeBob is pure, hyperactive optimism. Patrick is lovable stupidity. Squidward is burned-out adulthood. Mr. Krabs is greed. Sandy is brains and toughness. Plankton is tiny-scale supervillain ambition. Bikini Bottom feels like a fully realized town, from the Krusty Krab to Jellyfish Fields, with running gags and background characters that reward rewatching. Visually, the show jumps between traditional animation exaggerated facial close-ups, and sudden shifts in style, which helped it generate endless reaction images and memes. That online afterlife keeps SpongeBob in the cultural conversation, so even people who haven't watched TV in years still recognize frames and jokes. It proves that a classic can come from the late 90s and still stand shoulder to shoulder with much older legends. Most hated, Clutch Cargo. Now onto the infamous side of the spectrum. Clutch Cargo, a 1959 adventure cartoon, is notorious mostly for one technique: Synchrovox, where live-action lips were composited onto still cartoon faces instead of animating mouths. What was meant as a cost-saving trick now lands squarely in uncanny valley territory, with many modern viewers calling it creepy or nightmare fuel in retrospectives. The show follows a square-jawed hero, Clutch, on globe-trotting missions, but movement is extremely limited, often just sliding still images around while only the mouth moves. For 1950s television budgets, it was a practical solution. For modern audiences used to fluid animation, it looks unfinished and unsettling. As a result, Clutch Cargo frequently appears on worst classic cartoons lists and is remembered more as a technical oddity than a beloved series. Critics generally don't call it malicious or harmful. It's simply a relic of extreme cost-cutting that aged very poorly. In discussions about classic TV animation, it usually shows up as an example of what happens when production shortcuts overpower charm and craftsmanship. Most hated, New Adventures of Gilligan. The New Adventures of Gilligan tried to turn the popular live-action sitcom Gilligan's Island into a Saturday morning cartoon, but it's often cited as one of the weaker classic adaptations. The premise stayed basically the same: castaways stuck on an island, botched rescue attempts, and goofy misunderstandings. But without the original actor's physical comedy and timing, much of the charm disappeared. Animation was limited and stiff, relying heavily on reused motions and simple backgrounds, which made episodes feel visually flat. Instead of using the freedom of animation to push wild slapstick or impossible scenarios, the show mostly replicated sitcom-level plots in a cheaper-looking medium, leaving audiences wondering what the cartoon added. Critics and nostalgic reviewers often describe it as bland, rather than offensively terrible, but that blandness is exactly why it ends up on most hated or most disappointing lists. For many fans of the original series, it felt like a cash-in that didn't capture the ensemble chemistry or wit that made Gilligan's Island a rerun staple. Today, it's largely remembered as a cautionary tale that not every live-action hit needs an animated spin-off. Most hated, The Brady Kids. The Brady Kids is another example of a live-action success struggling in animated form. Spun off from The Brady Bunch in the early 1970s, it dropped the grounded family sitcom feel and threw the kids into stories with talking animals, a magical mynah bird, and Saturday morning fantasy antics. That dramatic shift in tone is one of the biggest reasons longtime viewers criticize it. Fans of the original show liked its relatively realistic, everyday problems: school, friendships, and sibling conflicts. In the cartoon, those relatable elements were replaced by surreal, often random adventures that didn't match the established vibe of the Brady universe. The animation quality was also typical low-budget 70s TV: lots of repeated frames, stiff movement, and simple layouts, which made it visually unremarkable. Retrospective reviewers and blogs often describe it as unnecessary and creatively thin, noting that it seems designed mainly to extend the brand rather than tell stories that needed to exist. As a result, The Brady Kids frequently appears on lists of the least liked classic cartoons and weakest TV spin-offs. Mixed, Popeye. Popeye the Sailor occupies a complicated place between loved and criticized. The character, originating in the early 20th century and exploding in animated shorts, is widely recognized as a cartoon icon, and many of the theatrical episodes are praised for inventive fights, rubbery animation, and strong comedic timing. Popeye's spinach-powered transformation even influenced real-world marketing campaigns, encouraging kids to eat vegetables. However, some Popeye cartoons from certain eras contain racial caricatures, wartime propaganda, and stereotypes that modern audiences find offensive. These episodes are often edited out of rotation or presented with disclaimers, and they draw significant criticism in discussions of classic animation's darker side. That dual legacy makes Popeye both a nostalgic favorite and a frequent example when people talk about how older media can be technically brilliant, yet culturally outdated. For many viewers, the core idea, a scrappy underdog defending friends and standing up to bullies, is still positive and memorable. But people also acknowledge that parts of the catalog are hard to watch today without context, positioning Popeye as a mixed bag in debates about most loved versus most hated classics. What loved versus hated really mean? When fans call a cartoon most loved, they're usually talking about how deeply it embedded itself into their lives. Quotes they still use, characters they still reference, and episodes they'll happily rewatch decades later. Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes, Scooby-Doo, and SpongeBob didn't just fill time slots, they became rituals, comfort food, and shared cultural language across generations. On the other hand, shows like Clutch Cargo, The New Adventures of Gilligan, and the Brady Kids show up as most hated, not always because they're unwatchably bad, but because they feel cheap, off-tone, or disturbingly dated next to their peers. Some are unsettling experiments that aged poorly. Others are bland brand extensions that failed to capture what fans loved in the first place. It's also true that hated doesn't mean absolutely nobody loves them. Every one of these shows has defenders who grew up with them and feel genuine nostalgia. In the end, the line between loved and hated often comes down to effort, creativity, and whether the cartoon respected its audience's time and intelligence, even when that audience was mostly kids. So, where does your childhood favorite land? On the legendary side, the roasted side, or that weird middle ground only you still defend?